Hello and welcome back to Saints of the Week here at the Things That Don't Change. Happy Feast of the Most Holy Trinity, everybody. Got two saints to go over this week, so might as well dive right in here. So the first saint that we have today is Saint Romuald. Now, Saint Romuald was born around the year 950 in the city of Ravenna, which is in northern Italy. And from a very early age, he was born into a noble family in the city. So from a very early age, he was just kind of exposed to a lot of the scheming, the conniving, just a lot of the kind of the vicious lifestyles that a lot of these nobles kind of lived in around this time. As a young man, he engaged in some of this. However, he kind of always felt deep down like a call to the monastic life from a very early age. And this kind of came to a head at the age of 20. When he witnessed his father actually kill an enemy of the family of their family. He actually killed the enemy kind of in a duel. Kind of this event, really set him off and made him realize that he wanted nothing to do with this life. So just after this, he fled to join an abbey. So the abbey that he joined was called Saint Apollinare in Class, which was a Benedictine monastery. While here, he became a religious brother here. This monastery around this time, that was kind of going through a bit of a revival period. Up until this point, some of the standards were kind of falling by the wayside. They're a bit lax. Some of the disciplines weren't being followed as they were supposed to be. A previous abbot of the monastery had started to put in some reforms. However, they're still kind of working out through some of those reforms, kind of still implementing them on the ground. So, when Romuald got there, he was completely all in for going back to kind of the really rigorous lifestyles. So, he would kind of upbraid his fellow brothers when they weren't quite living up and quite acting in the way that they should have. Just kind of trying to get them to kind of be more zealous in their kind of practice of their order. Now, naturally, this made a lot of the less zealous brothers a bit upset, and he kind of made a lot of enemies in the monastery because of this. When Romuald decided that he didn't really want to be in this monastery anymore because it wasn't quite working out with him because of all these issues. He requested to kind of retire, to which they are more than happy to allow him to do. So after his, kind of quote unquote retirement, he traveled to Venice, where he made contact with a hermit named Marinus, who's just kind of known for living this very austere, kind of very bare bones life. So Romuald kind of became a student of Marinus, and kind of lived with him for many years, kind of learning under him, learning from his teaching, kind of learning how to kind of be a hermit. And it was around the year 978. He's kind of been with Marinus for a couple of years now. So it's around this year that the Doge of Venice, right? So the Doge is kind of the guy who kind of is in charge of the state of Venice, kind of the Duke. They call him the Doge. The Doge around this time was a man named Pietro Orseolo, the first. And so Pietro had a bit of let's say, a rough journey to become Doge around this time, in that he had his predecessor murdered, and basically usurped the seat and became, the new Doge of Venice. So, Pietro, he kind of had done this. However, he was starting to kind of feel remorse for having done that. And kind of, he was Doge now. He had all the power that he wanted, but it wasn't making him happy. He realized that he murdered him. He was responsible for murdering a man. It wasn't really sitting right with him, and he needed to find repentance. So he turned and he sought out Marinus and Romuald for advice, knowing them as kind of the famous, very famous hermits. And they, along with some of the other religious in Venice, kind of urged him to renounce his office, turn from his wicked life, and become a monk at an abbey in Cuxa, which I believe is in southern France. So he agreed to do this. So Pietro did actually become a monk, left behind everything that he had, all of his wealth, all of his positions, all of his power, and joined this monastery. And, just to kind of go off on his story a bit, he actually did end up turning into a very holy man, and is actually now recognized as Saint Pietro Orseolo. So, able to kind of turn from this wicked lifestyle, this wicked worldly lifestyle, into a saint in his own right, thanks to the intercessions of, these two great hermits. So going back to Romuald, he lived as a monk near Pietro's monastery for 5 years. And, just around this time, he was known for his very humble and austere lifestyle. And also just, people were eager to learn under him. So he started to kind of have a gathering of disciples who would kind of follow him around and hang on his preachings. So some years later, he returned to his father Sergius, who actually at this point had also become a repentant monk, kind of repenting for the fact that he also killed a man in a duel. and then turned to the monastery. However, around this time, his father was having some doubts as to his vocation. So Romuald kind of went home to reassure his father and, just kind of help reignite his faith in devotion as a monk. He kind of put his father through a very strict prayer discipline to kind of help resolve some of these doubts and kind of work through some of these spiritual issues, which he was successful in. So his father kind of was renewed in his vigor as a monk. So after that was accomplished, Romuald spent the next 30 years wandering Italy and just, founding many monasteries, many hermitages, just kind of instructing people in kind of his lifestyle in the way the way that he interacted with the faith. In the year 1012, he came to the town of Vallombrosa, and it was while he was here that it was said that a man named Modolus came up to him. This man Modolus was, a local from the area who owned some lands, and he had a vision of a group of monks in white kind of ascending into heaven. And in his interpretation of this vision, he figured that he was being called to kind of donate some of his lands to Romuald and kind of to his kind of burgeoning movement. So he did this, gave him a plot of land nearby, and it was on this land that Romuald built 5 hermitage cells. And then eventually this became the mother house of what was known as the Camaldulis order. So this is kind of the order of monks that he founded, which kind of combines the Benedictine spirituality, the Benedictine monastic life and discipline, kind of with the very austere hermit's lifestyle that up until this point Romuald had been living. So he died in the town of Val di Castro in 1027. And very quick after his death, his tomb became known as a place where many miracles happens. And an altar was kind of built here and allowed to be built here, and kind of so mass could be celebrated around the year 1032. So, only a couple of years after he died, it's already a very holy spot. In the year 1466, his body was actually exhumed and found to be incorrupt, which means, there was no decay even after all these hundreds of years. And then it was transferred to the Italian city of Fabriano. His original feast day was fixed on the 19th of June in the year 1594, right after the Council of Trent. However, because 19th of June was the day the day that he died on, so that was kind of set as his feast day. However, only a year later, the feast was transferred to February the 7th by Pope Clement VIII. And this was to commemorate the anniversary of when his relics were transferred, right? So his body was transferred, as I mentioned, from where he had originally been buried to the town of Fabriano. So that day that happened was February 7th. So that was the date chosen as his feast day. And that remained his feast day until 1969 with the renewal of the new version of the Roman calendar, when it was returned back to June 19th, the day that he died. So we celebrate Saint Romuald on June the 19th. Now, the next saint that we have is Saint Aloysius Gonzaga. So Saint Aloysius was born on the 9th of March in the year 1568, and he lived in the town of Castiglione delle Stiviere, which was part of the Duchy of Mantua. So Mantua was kind of one of the many duchies and kind of city-states in northern Italy around this time. And he was born, he was actually the oldest of 8 children as part of a cadet branch of the famed House of Gonzaga. So the House of Gonzaga had actually been the rulers of Mantua for hundreds of years, from the year 1328 to the year 1708. So for several hundred years, Gonzagas were kind of the top dog in Mantua, and a very prominent family kind of in northern Italy. So his father was Ferrante Gonzaga, who was the Marquess of Castiglione, so the town that he lived in. His father was in charge of that town. And as the oldest and the heir, his father expected him to be a soldier, kind of going down a similar pathway to his own life. However, at the age of 7, Aloysius experienced a profound religious awakening. He started praying and just was really called to have these great devotions to, the office of Mary and also the Psalms. From here, he kind of started off on this more religious, kind of deeply religious path. He was educated in Florence around the age of 9, where he was for several years. By the age of 11, he was teaching catechism to poor children. He was also fasting 3 days a week, practicing austerity and just kind of educating, those kind of around him. He actually received his first communion from none other than Charles Borromeo, who was cardinal around this time. St. Charles at this time, Archbishop of Milan. In the year 1580, St. Aloysius received his first communion from this great holy man, which just kind of shows you the types of circles him and his family were involved with around this time. At the age of 13, he accompanied his parents and also the Empress of Austria, so the Empress, the wife of the Holy Roman Emperor. He accompanied them on a journey to Spain, and served as as a page in the court of the Spanish King Philip II. And despite all this grandeur and all this wealth and all this great noble, all these great nobles that he met and interacted with around this time, it was during this time that he also started to become very disillusioned of the courtly life. He just wasn't really into it, wasn't really looking forward to kind of coming into his own as his father's heir and becoming, a Marquess in his own right. And, in this kind of disquiet that he found, with court life, he ended up finding solace kind of more in the lives of the saints and kind of really diving deep into religion. So he made the decision officially to become a missionary after he read about what the Jesuits, who were still very new around this time, what the Jesuits were doing in India with preaching and ministering to the people over there. So from that point, he decided, hey, I want to be a Jesuit. These people are really dedicated to really great mission work. I want to do that. So his mother agreed to this. However, his father was furious, as could be expected. A great, leader and military commander wanting his son to follow in these footsteps, and then his heir doesn't want to. His heir wants to become a priest. So a battle of wills started to kind of emerge between father and son and other members of the family because of this. The family really tried to change his mind about becoming a priest. Just saying, hey, look, if you become a Jesuit, then you're gonna need to renounce your inheritance, your status. Kind of, you're gonna have to give up everything that you have. Do you really want to do that? Despite these things and despite these kind of arguments and kind of debates his family would get into with him to try to convince him otherwise, it became clear that he wanted to be a priest. So they said, okay, fair enough. But instead of becoming a Jesuit and becoming a missionary, how about you just become a diocesan priest? Look, we have connections. We can get you a bishopric. You can become a bishop really quickly and kind of become an administrator. How about that? Maybe that's a better path for you. However, Aloysius was not interested in this path. He didn't want an office. He didn't want any kind of high titles or anything. He wanted to be a missionary. So finally, he was allowed to do so. His family kind of gave up on protesting that. And he officially renounced his right to inheritance, and that was confirmed by the Holy Roman Emperor himself. So he was accepted into the Society of Jesus on the 25th of November in the year 1585. So he lived in Rome around this time. And he had to kind of actually moderate some of his asceticism because he was a Jesuit now. So he was kind of now beholden to his superiors, who kind of had a bit of a different rigor that they wanted him to devote himself to. However, his poor health kind of caused some problems. From a very early age, he got very sick as a young child, and that kind of was something that stuck with him, for the rest of his life. So his poor health caused problems, and while he was studying in Milan for a time, actually his spiritual director was none other than Cardinal Bellarmine. So Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, another saint who he interacted with and knew very closely in his life. So, he had to return from Milan and return to Rome. And in the year 1589, he actually went to Mantua because there was a bit of a dispute between his brother Rodolfo and the Duke of Mantua, right? So his family was kind of from a minor branch in a minor town, and they're having a bit of issues kind of with the higher ups in the duchy. So he kind of had to go and moderate some of that. He returned to Rome the next year in the year 1590. And it's said during this time that he actually had a vision of the Archangel Gabriel, who appeared to him and told him within 1 year he was going to die. So the next year, 1591, a plague broke out in Rome. The Jesuits opened a hospital to kind of minister to a lot of the sick, and Aloysius was, super ecstatic to volunteer and kind of help, the sick, people who were sick with this plague. So he also spent some time begging for alms that, then he could donate to the victims to kind of help them get back on their feet. And also, he just, would carry the dying from the streets into the hospital so that they could, die with a bit of dignity, in the care of the Jesuits. He washed plague victims, he fed them, helped prepare them to receive the sacraments, receive last rites, things like this. But however, after, some time, and a lot of the young Jesuits started to become sick, a lot of the superiors in the order were starting to be a little more wary about letting the younger priests, allowing them to assist in this work. So Aloysius was forbidden from continuing to help. However, he protested that, as he protested his family not letting him join the priesthood originally. And eventually the superiors allowed him to return to that work of ministering to the sick. And Unfortunately, he became infected from his time, ministering with the plague victims, and became gravely ill in March of 1591, and basically just bedridden. So his health gradually declines, and was given extreme unction, which today we would call anointing of the sick. And he died after receiving last rites by Cardinal Bellarmine himself on the 21st of June in the year 1591, and he was only 23 years old when he passed away. So St. Aloysius was buried at the Church of the Most Holy Annunciation in Rome, which nowadays we know is the Church of St. Ignatius of Loyola. He was beatified by Pope Paul V in the year 1605, and then finally canonized along with St. Stanislaus, who was another young Jesuit who passed away. He was canonized along with St. Stanislaus by Pope Benedict XIII in the year 1726, and his feast day is on June the 21st. Now, that's all we have for today. As always, thank you all for coming out, and can't wait to see you all next week for the Feast of Corpus Christi. And until then, God bless.